The only way I think we can move forward now is to deconstruct the system. So the first step of the Me-to-We Continuum is trust, because it's about building a benefit for me, the individual. Me, mine, ours, us, which is community, and it's about connectivity. And it can be connectivity in the sense of a community your business creates. You can compound, you can create exponential growth.
Yes.
And so I think we have to break the structures down to rebuild a new.
Anne Bahr Thompson is a purpose-led strategist helping global brands move beyond statements into embodied impact, aligning purpose, trust, and performance to shape the future of business.
Coherence is energetic alignment, and it's something we feel. Nespresso has been investing in the U.S. city by city. It's trust. I used to talk about it as gliding back and forth across the continuum, but it's an infinity loop. It's a circle that just keeps building on itself.
So what would you say to business owners who are trying to navigate this right now, where they are really concerned about benefiting all of their stakeholders more broadly?
I think the challenge is
Welcome to the Purpose Profit Shift, where real stories about bold shifts illuminate how we can create a new economy. I'm your host, Rachel Bernier-Green, social entrepreneur, activist, and founder of EJ Consortium, a finance consulting firm designed to help purposeful businesses change the world. Today, we're sitting down with someone who's advised some of the biggest brands on the planet: Microsoft, L'Oreal, JP Morgan Chase, UNICEF. But her real work has been challenging these companies to stop asking, how do we look good, and how do we actually do good? Anne Bahr Thompson is a CSR top thought leader, Trust Across America honoree, and the author of Do Good, Embracing Brand Citizenship to Fuel Both Purpose and Profit. She created the Me-to-We Continuum, a framework that dismantles the myth that purpose and profit are in opposition. Anne works with leaders, founders, and visionaries to align inner clarity with outer expression so brand, strategy, and culture move as one. If you've ever felt like you're compromising your values for growth or your growth for values, this conversation is for you. Anne, welcome to the Purpose Profit Shift.
Oh, well, thank you, Rachel. I'm a little nervous that you've set the bar way up there. I'm not sure how I'm going to deliver against that.
I always have that reaction when someone kind of brings the highlights of your life and then it just kind of lists them as a highlight reel. It feels very different than the being in the action, and the highlights come after grueling work, and then there's a highlight and then you're back to the grueling work. So yeah, it is sometimes a little bit of a mind-bending experience to hear it all at once.
Well, let's dive in. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. So, Anne, you spent years at Interbrand advising some of the world's most powerful brands on how to differentiate themselves, win market share, and dominate their categories. But at some point, you realized that wasn't enough and that maybe it was actually the wrong question entirely. So take us back to that moment. When did you first feel the pull toward something deeper?
So I just want to say one thing, and I know there's a romantic ideal that corporate life can be hollow and corporate success can feel awful, and that you jump ship to go do something else. I would say my story, like a lot of founders, entrepreneurs, and even corporate executives I've worked with, doesn't necessarily follow that romantic path or the romantic ideal, let's say. I know it would be more appealing probably to all your, or maybe not all, but a lot of your listeners if I just said corporate success was hollow. But it actually wasn't. It was pretty rewarding at times. The opportunity, the playground I got to play on, or got to playground play on, that's a little bit redundant, and being someone about words, I hate when I hear myself do that. But the playground I was on was enormous and wonderful. And the thing that a lot of people ask me, and I will answer your question, so forgive me for going about it slightly circuitously, but a lot of people often say to me, why do you still work with large corporations? Don't you think that's awful? But large corporations have a scale. They impact our lives. And the notion of making even one small aspect of a supply chain in a large corporation better can transform so many people's existences. So I think this notion of corporate bad, small good is a bad thing.
Yes.
And I'd like to dispel that.
There's a lot of nuance.
Yes. And I think it all comes down to people and how people operate.
Right.
and how we each come into our job every day and interact. So I've just really completely derailed your question, and I'll now come back.
Oh, not at all. It's a great place to ground the conversation.
Oh, well, that's great
Yeah.
then. So certainly, I'm not going to pretend that there weren't politics that had me down. I was working at Interbrand London at the time when I left and went off on my own. Because certainly the politics were tough. I was in an office that was struggling at one point with financials. My first task when I arrived from the US was to lay off people. But actually, when I first joined Interbrand New York, I had to deal with some of those issues too. So it just seems to be the story of my life with Interbrand. But simultaneously, Interbrand for me was a romantic ideal in terms of what I was able to do. It was both quantitative and qualitative and fit both sides of my mind and both sides of my personality. And I loved that, like to interact with people, do focus groups and hear what real people are saying, and then go into an executive suite and get corporate executives to understand that and see how they could serve that was really what branding was all about to me. It was all about alignment and, frankly, healing corporate America very early on before this was all trendy. So for me, that notion of doing more, doing good has always been ingrained in how I've operated
Yeah.
and how I've shown up to work. And I think that's important for people to know. How you show up can make a difference and impact people. Now, why I left, to answer that question, it actually wasn't because of a lot of the frustrations that were there. It was more because we were living in London. My parents were both ill, and I needed flexibility in life. And it's very hard when you're traveling 250,000 miles a year to go back and forth and be there for your parents. And some people would say, well, you could care for your parents in other ways. That's just not who I am or how I was brought up.
Yeah.
So many of these decisions come down to personal choices and the balance of them. So my decision was personal. However, it did set me on a pathway. So one has to believe in, or one doesn't have to believe, but I believe that in hindsight, you see what the universe is doing for you. And it was putting me on a pathway to uncover and become part of a movement of purpose of doing good in its infancy, rather than when it became trendy and people knowing about it. So the notion of doing something more and aligning businesses, aligning their words and their actions was always part of who I am, and actually why I left banking and went into brand consulting.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of people don't know, after business school, I actually worked in heavy B2B corporate banking, not as a banker, in research and client satisfaction and marketing and that whole side of it, but still, it was heavy cash management. I was a product manager at one point for wire transfers and retirement services and investment management. So really heavy corporate B2B stuff.
Yeah.
And I left that and went into branding as a way to actually align businesses with their words, because what I saw in banking was not that. I have other aspects of my career, which I won't bore you with, but that's a little bit of that pathway. And I think, if I may indulge for one moment, the thing that I love is more about how we see how our pathway in life may have been laid out early on, and not necessarily in the way we often think. It's not about, oh, I wanted to be a ballet dancer or an artist when I was younger. I came from a family that was very heavy science and math, and going into business was actually like, a bad thing. They didn't want you to do that. That was not a definitive career unless you went into accounting or something that had a real straight career path. So one thing that really sticks out at me, and that I sort of am upset, when I found the letter in a drawer after my parents passed away, I threw it out. Why I didn't keep it, I don't know. Is in 4th grade, I wrote a letter to Procter & Gamble.
Really?
Yes, because they had an ad with a man, I think his name was Mr. Goodwin, and Mr. Goodwin had a pharmacy, and he sold toothpaste on his shelves. And as a 9-year-old, it troubled me that he had all these different brands of toothpaste on his shelf, And anytime one of his customers picked up one that wasn't Crest, and we were a loyal Crest family, so it wasn't that I thought Crest was a bad brand. But anytime someone picked up a toothpaste that wasn't Crest on his shelf, he would say, no, you don't want to buy that one. You have to buy Crest. And so I sent a letter to P&G and I said, I don't understand why Mr. Goodwin carries other products when he only wants to see people buy Crest. So it was all about alignment, which is all what the work of good branding, good purposes, is about coherence and alignment in a system. So even as a 9-year-old, this lack of coherence in Mr. Goodwin's little pharmacy system troubled me. And I did have a note from PSG.
Children in that way.
Yes, well, it is, and we don't honor those things enough, actually.
Yes.
And so I do want to say that it isn't always the notion of going back to what it is you wanted to be in childhood. Sometimes there's these weird little things that happen. I have a colleague who was one of the people who sort of named the pet rock, and she always uses this story as part of her narrative. So very, very long answer to a very simple question, and I apologize. I've gone through a lot of different pathways to get there.
Apologize. That is lovely because I think, one, it shows us that I think the truth is always more powerful than the romantic narrative or the trends. And also, I think that for people who are listening that are in corporate and thinking, how can I make a difference? It's important to remind people that you can make a difference regardless of where you are planted and who you are. It can show up in different ways at different times. Like, you don't have to be an entrepreneur or working in a small business to do something that's impactful. And to think about the scale of the impact that you were able to have. I think that weeding all of that in adds like beautiful context to the conversation. And it was also interesting. I keep finding strange commonalities that I did not expect to have with my guests, but I also come from a math and science family. Both my parents actually met at an engineering conference.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And so
my father may have been there, not my mother.
So yeah, it's a small world. And I'm the first person to go into business. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And
Wow.
3 of us studied engineering in some capacity out of the 6. Yeah, so it's interesting when you buck the trends that way. But let's talk about the Me-to-We Continuum, because one of the things I loved about this framework is it just cut through so much of the noise that we see in this space. And you've said that it details a progression from self-focused business models to stakeholder citizenship. Can you define stakeholder citizenship for people in the audience who may not be familiar with that concept before we dive into the Me-to-We Continuum?
Sure. And I think what they probably, if they've heard anything, what's more common is the phrase stakeholder capitalism. So, anyone who's taken an economics class will have heard of Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman, back in the 1970s, wrote an article in the New York Times. Was it the 70s or the 60s? Oh my gosh, I should know this by heart, and I don't.
I think the 60s.
Yeah, I have it. I talk about this in my book, and I actually trace the pathway. And when I wrote my book, Do Good, I have a chapter on redefining value. I believe it's chapter 2. And when I was writing it, I kept thinking it would be really fun to have a play that was a debate between Milton Friedman and Peter Drucker, because they represent 2 very different sort of approaches to management, each of which has influenced business in very strong ways. So Milton Friedman is most famous for saying that the purpose of a business is to increase shareholder wealth. There's a lot more nuance to it, and there's a lot of other issues around it, but that's the thing that's caught on. And that's what pushes people to say it's all just about profit, profit, profit. And now I'm even forgetting the question. The Me-to-We Continuum, stakeholder capitalism. So there we go. Yeah. So stakeholder citizenship, stakeholder capitalism. And I apologize in that I got myself all excited about that play I envisioned.
No, that's how my brain works, and like hyperlinks, and then I'll get excited about something and it's like, hey, great direction to go.
Now I have to hit the back button and go backwards. So there we go. So stakeholder capitalism is about taking into account all the people you touch in your ecosystem versus just the shareholders. And so it's about I don't want to say it's about trade-offs, because trade-offs make people think you can be sacrificing revenue and sacrificing earnings. When in reality, if you create a virtuous circle of benefiting everybody, you can compound in financial terms, in mathematical terms, you can create exponential growth. And so stakeholder capitalism is about taking into account internal people and external people. And when it's really done at its extreme, which is very complex for business, it goes outside the immediate rungs of who you touch.
Yeah.
Because you think about a business that sources something in the developing world, and they source it from a single factory. So if you're just on the first ring of stakeholders, you might just say it's the owners of that factory, or you might say it's the workers also. But if you then think about what that's impacting in a small community, that factory impacts people who don't work there. So it can go as wide or as narrow, depending upon how you do your rings and look at the system you're part of. But stakeholder capitalism is about all of that, versus shareholder capitalism is about a Venn diagram that would have shareholders sitting in a large circle in the center, and it's probably the other one's not even touching. The other audiences, stakeholders, not even touching that, because they would say that's completely separate and apart. And I do want to say, you do have a responsibility to benefit your investors too. It's not about not paying your investors, but it's about creating a system that benefits everybody. And that's how I like to think of stakeholder capitalism.
Because we so often, I feel like there is pervasive false dichotomy that we are choosing one or the other. And we get lost in so many conversations about what the right choice is, when it's not a choice that you have to make at all. And so we waste so much energy.
It's about making a decision through a filter. And that's where we can talk about purpose after, because purpose, the driving force of why your business exists, is the filter through which you do that. Now, if you want to actually, you said something that's really interesting, because the level setting I'd like to do based upon your first introduction of the Me-to-We Continuum is me, if you hear that word, does make you think selfish and individual. But the Me-to-We Continuum was developed from the grassroots up, not intentionally. It's something that emerged in research organically, that because of who I am, because I always did care, was something I invested a lot of time, effort, and money into pursuing and understanding, based upon unexpected results in a study that had nothing to do really with corporate citizenship. There was one little question about that, but that's not what the study was about. But so me in this instance is me from the perspective of the customer you serve as a business.
Yeah.
So the first step of the Me-to-We Continuum is trust, because it's about building a benefit for me, the individual. And so it's me, mine, ours, us, we, if you look at it from that sort of perspective. So me is trust. Mine is enrichment. Enrich my life, make me better in the way you serve me. And you can see how both those things also turn in on employees and turn in on all your stakeholders. So me, mine, ours is responsibility. And this is where a lot of the traditional notions of corporate citizenship sit. And very early on in my research, which started in 2011-ish, we learned that people would not give a business credit for the good it was doing for the environment if it treated its employees badly. And, you know, now we're in a little bit of a trade-off on that because of the existential nature that we are in terms of where the environment is heading. But so we have me, trust, enrichment, mine, ours, responsibility, me, mine, ours, us, which is community. And it's about connectivity. And it can be connectivity in the sense of a community your business creates, but it can also be connectivity in the sense of a trade organization you belong to. It's that whole sense of building community of like-minded people with shared values. And then we is about contribution. Make me bigger than I am through my association with you. And so you can see where responsibility, community, and contribution are where things turn on what people often think of as purpose, when they define it as having a social mission. I would say purpose starts at the very beginning because it's why your business exists. It doesn't mean it has to have a social mission. Some businesses, if they're honest, their purpose really is just to earn money. Perhaps I say that slightly sarcastically, but the idea is to be honest in this approach.
Right.
Because you can't build trust when you're not honest. But if you don't
Absolutely.
think of the wider audiences of your stakeholders, your wider stakeholders, you won't sit on the curve of brand citizenship. And originally, I thought it was a progression that every brand had to be thought of as a brand of contribution. But over a course of many years of research, and then certainly within the pandemic, what you start seeing, and it makes perfect sense, is that responsibility, community, and contribution enhance trust. So the continuum is in an infinity loop. And when I wrote the book, I hadn't realized that. I knew there was something off, but I couldn't figure it out. And then when COVID hit, it was, oh my gosh, how could I not have said that? It's trust. I used to talk about it as gliding back and forth across the continuum, but it's an infinity loop. It's a circle that just keeps building on itself.
So, with that being said, is there a 2.0 version of the books in the work given every
I don't know. I
change?
keep thinking about it, and I actually I haven't told anybody this, so this is like a reveal. Several months ago, I think it was the start of the summer maybe, I had this inspiration. I sat down and 4 chapters came out of me. And I can tell you, when I was writing the real book, or the original book, that did not happen. It just flowed. But it was all about this notion of coherence, which I've been talking a lot about, and how that fosters belonging and also has a stream of humanness. There's a series of strands that run into this notion. Coherence is energetic alignment, and it's something we feel. And I put together a book proposal, contacted my agent, and my agent came back to me and said, I have to be really honest, I don't understand what this book is about. And I was like, how could you not understand this? So there may be a 2.0, but I think at the moment where my head is ahead of where the world is at right now. And everything's all about a moment. My husband's he's no longer, but he was an analyst. And his first supervisor said to him, you can only predict 2 weeks ahead. If you predict any further ahead than that, people just don't understand it. So I'm letting this sit, and I'm seeing if there's a more resonant way of approaching this for today's world. And we'll see if it happens. I don't know if there's a 2.0. There was never a 1.0 intentionally in the works either. I started writing articles about this and speaking, and publishers contacted me and said, we think there's a book in this, which is probably why the book was a bit of a struggle for me. I didn't even know how to write a book. I had written a chapter for a book, but writing a book is a vast undertaking. I would say what was striking to me was to learn how many people I thought wrote books that actually didn't write them themselves. You know this drill too.
Yeah, when I started looking into writing my first book, and that was one of the things that surprised me the most.
For your audience, that means that a lot of people hire ghostwriters.
Yeah.
But I think if you're really trying to express ideas in your head, and it depends how you think, and you said you think similarly to me, so you may appreciate this, is actually as I'm writing, I'm reforming a lot of what I'm thinking. So unless I had a Vulcan mind link with a ghostwriter, I'm not sure it would work.
I have a lot of questions about how the end results end up coming together, especially if the ghostwriter, this is not something that they, care passionately about. And yeah, so a lot of questions, but if the timing aligns and another book comes, then we'll have to have you back to talk about that one and share the premise with the audience, because yeah, I feel like I don't have words strong enough to articulate what this current moment is. Like saying we're in flux or chaos does not feel entirely adequate.
So my one way of how I get through this on the days that I'm having a real struggle, which unfortunately sometimes when I wake up and pick up my phone, is more days than I care to admit. But I think we're at that moment of 2 energies hitting against each other. the only way I think we can move forward now is to deconstruct the system.
Yes.
We've been, we'll probably talk about purpose and other things in the course of this. And so much of how this has been approached, whether it's environmental sustainability issues or DEI or social impact, have been about appendages in an organization. So they add more functions rather than make it integrative. And that's what coherence is all about, is about making it integrative. And so I think we have to break the structures down to rebuild a new structure. And so I'm probably speaking slightly out there, and some people may say this is woo-woo or whatever, but I do believe
That's
that's
our podcast specializes in.
well, that's good to know then, because I didn't know that in advance of talking to you. But that seems to be the direction we're heading. So there we go. But I do think that the thing that does hearten me is, if you've ever been to Climate Week, this Climate Week this year in New York was very different. And it was less about the hype and the polish and the varnish on the outside, and much more about the integration of things. And so many businesses are still focused on DEI, still focused on sustainability, but they're not talking about it in that way. The numbers show over and over that these things better a business, that they create more innovation,
Right.
they enhance profit. There's so many studies that show this, both from the qualitative perspective and financial quantitative perspective. And businesses are just going on, even as they're hesitant. They're just calling it different things. And yes, there are the nefarious players, and I'm not going to pretend they're not out there. And they're the ones that seem to get the headlines. But the average person doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm not going to do my best to help the world today or help other people. Sometimes those other people are their family as their top priority. And for some people, unfortunately, that is themselves as the priority. But most people wake up and try to figure out how they can contribute something in that day in the best way they can.
And I think that is absolutely true. And it carries me a lot to see Mr. Rogers say, look for the helpers.
Yes, I'm not, my sister is more of a Mr. Rogers fan than I was, but yes, I'm sure that sounds like something he would say.
Yeah, my maiden name is Rogers, and so they
lovely.
joke with my dad that he's Mr. Rogers, and so
I love that.
that's a hit around our house. I would love to talk about you just mentioned that there is kind of all of this data that supports the idea that most companies and brands are aligned with, what people want to see, that they're still doing this work, that they're just maybe calling it something different. So can you talk about some of the data points that you've seen that kind of illustrate this?
And it's less data points about companies themselves, but more about the evidence of why people have to continue in that way.
Yeah.
So there's a gentleman, George Serafeim, who's a professor at Harvard, who's done a lot of work on finance and share price and market cap and things like that, that has shown, and he's shown numerous times how different elements of the wider definition of sustainability. I know now when we hear it, we often go right to eco, but sustainability initially covers those SDGs in total from the UN. So it's a wide range of social impact as well as environmental impact.
Right.
And George Serafeim has shown how share price over time has been steadier, has been higher, has retained. There's all sorts of numbers. I don't know the latest ones out there. And I haven't seen what he's done in the past year or so. And I think, unfortunately, the past year may create anomalies in some of the systems. But he has done a lot that demonstrates that. So if anyone's interested, look up George Serafeim and you'll gain a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of research firms out there and consultancies doing things. There's a research firm called Kantar, which is a global research firm that's part of one of the big communications holding companies. And they estimated that sustainability, which is an expression of purpose in the sense of purpose as doing good, adds $193 billion to the value of the world's top 100 brands. So that's a huge figure. There's another firm, Brand Finance, that does brand valuations, and they're actually accredited. They're out of the UK, and their methodology has been accredited by, not GAP, because that's US, but I'm drawing a blank on what the parallel of GAP is globally, but they've been accredited by the accountancy organization, and for the value of brand to be on a balance sheet. And that's very important when a company's selling.
Yeah.
But brand finance has determined the gap of what companies are losing if they have sustainability initiatives that they're not communicating to their audiences about. And Microsoft's, I believe last time they did it was around $5.9 billion that they're losing because they're not communicating that. So again, some of this might be different now because of the heightened backlash, but these numbers have been consistent over and over. NYU Stern's Business School has a Center for Sustainable Business that's pretty advanced in everything they do. They've done a lot of research alongside Circana, which is one of the people who track all your grocery purchases, as well as Edelman. And they found that sustainably marketed products accounted for, and I can't remember if this was a 2024 or 2025 number, but they accounted for 23.8% CPG, consumer packaged goods sales in the US. And that was up from 14.6%. So 23.8 up from 14.0. There was a huge increase. 10% increase. Sustainable products today, their research has also shown, are driving 41% of market growth, 2.3% times faster than conventional alternatives, with a 5-year CAGR, compound annual growth rate. So that's huge. Legacy brands moving to sustainable packaging is driving a lot of that. But we're also seeing a lot of things in supply chain that I think we may starting to see people talk a little bit more about the efficacy of their supply chain in there. They've also found from a marketing perspective that if you just talk about sustainability for the sake of it, it doesn't do that much. But if you combine sustainability as a benefit to a standard consumer benefit, what you call an RTB, reason to believe, in the consumer marketing world. So if you add a sustainability benefit to an RTB, reason to believe, you can increase consumer interest in your products by 16%.
So can you, do you have an example, even without using an actual brand name, of a company that did this in?
I can actually talk about, and I proudly talk about, a brand name of a brand I've been working on with. So I work on my own with large companies, often more increasingly more global nonprofits. And then I also do advisory work for different consultancies and agencies. And I've been working very closely with a small creative purpose-based agency. And their name's A Company, and they've been working with Nespresso for many years. And Nespresso is a brand a lot of people think of as single-serve coffee. And I personally don't believe in single-serve coffee because I do think of it as associated with waste. But when you learn about Nespresso, you start changing your opinion about a lot of this. And Nespresso has always used aluminum capsules since day one. Part of it had to do with the brilliance of what aluminum does for the coffee. It locks in flavor and taste and makes it better. And they have a very price system which has the right pressure on these capsules that makes your coffee taste better. And so they chose, back when they first started, which is 40 years ago, they chose aluminum both in terms of the flavor, the precision in terms of the energy the system would use to create your coffee, as well as the fact that aluminum is nearly infinitely recyclable.
Yeah.
Yes, aluminum mining is not a good thing, and I'm not going to pretend it is, but 75% of aluminum ever produced is still in circulation. So your aluminum capsules, I look at your face, I love that.
Yeah, my jaw literally dropped.
Yeah. So aluminum capsules versus a plastic pod actually have a potential to not be as wasteful as other single-serve systems. So Nespresso has been investing in the US city by city because their shops is where the highest density of their product usage is. And in New York, for example, they invested, I think it was over $1.2 million to get a special machine that goes into the waste facilities that allows you to recycle your capsule in total. So you just throw it in the blue bin in New York City, and there's some other cities this is happening in, and I can't say because every city's laws keep changing. So some of the places they're looking to do this in, the timing is a little off, so I don't want to give the names, but New York is a very safe place to talk about.
Yeah.
They wanted people to, they have it so you just drop the aluminum capsule in the blue bin. And they wanted us to do a campaign that was all about recycle more. Well, what we explained to them was people know to recycle. You can't tell them recycle more. And Nespresso offers multiple ways to recycle. You can drop it off at their shop, you can put it in a bag and mail it back to them, or you can throw it in the blue bin. Why not just throw it in the blue bin? And from an energy usage standpoint, that's the best one, really, because you're not shipping. There's all the sorts of things in there that aren't happening. But we said to them, if we just do a campaign to New Yorkers to talk about recycling, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to change habits. We're not going to change behavior. We need to get them to see aluminum as this luxury material it is, as this infinitely recyclable material that not only locks in freshness, but also helps you, deal with the whole waste issue. We have a whole campaign around that. And when it was tested, this was designed solely for people within the Nespresso system, so current members who purchase Nespresso. When this campaign was tested against non-users, the general population, people were like, wow, I had no idea about this. I'm going to consider Nespresso now. So you were pulling people into the franchise. So I think that's a really lovely example. And then there's also things that Nespresso supported an organization called Ali Forney. A company created mugs. We created merchandise mugs to sell alongside that as part of the support, with designs that were created by both and I may get this wrong, so forgive me because I'm forgetting, both the people who are at Ali Forney, and it's for LGBTQ youth that are disenfranchised. And so the designs were created with them, with an artist, actually, I take it back, who supported them. Nespresso sold all these mugs, and it was an internal engagement thing for one of their employee resource groups at the time that everybody rallied around and everybody got involved with, and the merchandise sold out really fast, and the money was donated to Ali Forney. So Nespresso, so you have brands that are doing these things that people just don't know about these things. Because I was someone who was anti single serve coffee, and Nespresso has changed my mind about them as a brand. I like to talk about that as an example, because as a consultant, you work on brands you believe in and brands you don't believe in. And the one luxury about going on my own has been I get to work with brands I believe in and not necessarily always the ones on the other side.
I love that, because I think there are so many conversations that I've been privy to where people talk about the converse side of that, where people are kind of purpose washing or greenwashing and putting out a story that's not really actually backed by behavior, and don't really talk about all of the positive things that are going on in rooms that, you don't hear about, but they actually are having a positive impact on supply chain, on the environment, on the employees, a very broad stakeholder impact that people just may not be aware of.
I'm in firm agreement with that. The one thing I do want to say about greenwashing or purpose washing or pink washing or whatever washing we want to label it as, sometimes it is nefarious and sometimes it's accidental. And I do want to say that sometimes, and that's what has marketers scared right now. Between that and the backlash, it's like you're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. And frankly, in some ways, all of this for me has been a really good thing, because I think it's forced purpose and all the things it encompasses, whether you think of it as sustainability, social impact, whatever aspects of doing good you want to think of it as, it's forced it to become more about adding value and creating value in a business rather than varnish on the outside. And so it's forced it to mature, to become more integrated into the system and how business operates daily and how people interact with each other daily. And that's where this notion of energetic coherence starts coming in. And to me, we are potentially moving to a new space. I know it's hard to believe at this moment, but if you don't focus on that, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning.
I 100% agree. And I'd love to dig in there a bit, because we've kind of alluded to it a few times about, current backlash around DEI and purpose and the environment. So what would you say to business owners who they are trying to navigate this right now, where they are really concerned about benefiting all of their stakeholders more broadly, but they are also rightfully concerned about the backlash that they may receive in this current environment and whether or not that negates some of the shifts that we've seen over the past decade, 15 years, supporting the rise of, consumers really making purchasing decisions based on values alignment.
Consumers who I like to think of as people, because sometimes when we use the word consumers, we forget we're each one of them.
Yes.
So I don't think people necessarily are changing what they desire and what their behavior is. At the moment, with inflation and price increases, people purchase. There are some real issues in that, and there are some real trade-offs. That said, given a choice, there are a significant number of people that will buy something that is associated with more, let's just call it in a wide way, fair trade. So fair operating.
Yeah.
Responsible. Let's go back to the Me-to-We Continuum about responsibility and caring, which is that pivot point between serving me and serving we, being responsible. So for businesses, I would say, do what reflects your values, but you don't have to announce it. It's about living it. And we forget that so much of the backlash has to do with announcements rather than simply living. And that's where I say we're hitting a place of maturity in this, is we decide what we're about as a business and we proceed in this. We don't have to announce it. If you work with suppliers who have their own, especially people who work globally, they still have ESG reporting to do or things like that. So sometimes they want to know what your issues are with this. Well, filling out that form isn't necessarily publicizing it. But let people know these things, because I do know for myself, for many of the people in my little echo chamber, we do care about these things, and we do sometimes make decisions on the things we buy, the vendors we use, the business partners and collaborators we work with based upon where their values are. So there's ways to do it that make it part of daily operations rather than a campaign.
I agree. But another thing I also tell clients often is that the loud minority that is generating this backlash, in many instances, they weren't your client anyway. And so one of the things that we've talked a lot about on our team is that we know that our brand values will alienate some people, that they are not in alignment, and that is actually okay, because we think that sign of a strong brand is that it not only attracts the type of people we want to work with, but it also repels away people that we do not want to work with, because the people in our experience who would have a problem with our values are the people who are, not going to treat our team well. Mm-hmm. They will manufacture false emergencies just to, make people work overtime to meet arbitrary goals. They will, yell and blame and not have accountability. And so we're actually finding that we are leaning into it, and that we are just going to be okay with some people being unhappy that we exist, and that's perfectly fine.
In many ways, it's a return to niche marketing, which we all seem to have forgotten about in this world. We all talk about our target audience, but yet want everyone. And so in many ways, what you're talking about is that. And there's such, if I go back to that notion of coherence as energetic alignment, there is such energy underpinning what you're talking about. As quantum physics continues to advance, we do know there is truth in that.
And I think that it can be difficult, especially, in environments like this, because you mentioned before that this isn't just a bunch of, loud, angry people, that there are systemic issues at play here, that prices are rising, people are losing jobs, that those things are real. And I think one of the things that we talked about earlier before we started recording the call is the role that panic can play in the decisions that people make. And I think that is one of the things I hope people take away from this conversation, that now is not the time for panicking or changing who you are in light of this backlash, just being intentional about how we navigate this current environment. Because there are, to your point about dismantling systems, I think that there are more people than ever in modern American history who are bought into that idea and who are now saying, okay, we do need to dismantle some things. We do need to unlearn some things so that we can rebuild something bigger and better. And they're trying to figure out what role they can play even despite the chaos.
I agree with that. And I think the challenge is doing that from a place of service, positive intent versus a place of anger. And I think that's the challenge at the moment, because anger puts us in a mindset of fight or flight, which shuts down our system and our ability to innovate.
Absolutely.
And so
panic the same.
And so when you create chaos, you have people in a system that physically is shutting their mind down to opportunity and possibility. And so I know it's really hard, but centering yourself in your heart is really essential in today's world. And again, I don't mean to veer off into what my husband calls my Cucamonga side, but it really is very important today to breathe and ground yourself again. And then we all fall in. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I'm immune from the trap. We're all in the trap.
Yeah.
But the fear is what stops us from believing in a brighter future and focusing on dystopianness. Because at the end of the day, biologically, when you're in fight or flight, it's about survival and not about possibility.
And there are 2 books that I'll have to drop in the show notes that really illustrate that point. One, it's called Propaganda and Persuasion, which was actually, I studied propaganda in college, and that was one of the textbooks that we used. And the other is Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, because both of them talk about how the intention of authoritarian regimes is to cause panic and chaos and fear, exactly for the reasons that you shared, because of the biological impact that it has on us. And it makes it easier for them to move their plans forward if they can count on people to withdraw and to enter, fight or flight mode, because they are counting on us to shut down. And that's why, who's that? The joy is an act of resistance. I think it might have been on.
Oh, someone just said this to me the other day, and I wrote it down in my book, but I probably won't be able to find it. I hadn't heard that before. I think it's really interesting that you're talking about persuasion, because yesterday morning when I was on the ergometer, and I don't know why, but this notion, there's a book called Truth in Advertising, and I can't remember, I don't think it was John O'Toole, but one of the original Mad Men wrote it. We always think of David Ogilvy's book, but there was a book called Truth in Advertising. I don't think it was Ogilvy. Gosh, that's terrible. I should have looked it up then. Little did I know I'd bring it up. For some reason, this name just went through my head. Probably I was listening to a podcast or something on the radio that caused that. But I started thinking that maybe I need to write a piece or start thinking about truth versus persuasion and what the role of marketing is, or what the role of communications are. Because we often think of communications as persuasion. But what if we start thinking about truth as an energetic form of persuasion? And if you think of the infinite circle of the Me-to-We Continuum, it starts with me and truth. Trust is about truth. And I don't know, so maybe I'm being guided to talk to you about this because it is something I need to go pursue. I don't know. Maybe that's the next book. Who knows?
Maybe so. It feels like we keep coming back to it.
Yeah. So anyhow, I do think there is something in that notion of truth as persuasion versus truth versus persuasion, which is how we kind of think of things now. And I think it's interesting you brought up Naomi Klein, because in the heyday of brand consulting before the digital era, around the turn of the millennium, I think it was when Naomi Klein wrote No Logo.
Yes.
And everyone talked about that as the death of there. I have it in a shelf somewhere as well. Everyone talked about it as the death of brand. And then I had clients telling me, how you talk about brand is exactly the philosophy she's espousing. She just says it's not about brand. But that's how, so I think of brand as the human face of the business. And it's that the human face we form a relationship with that creates preference and loyalty, that creates a steadier flow of revenue. So that is, to me, what brand is about. Yes, branding has to do with marketing and advertising and those things, but brand is the human face. It's what we connect with for a business. And then if we go back to the Me-to-We Continuum, which is the model of brand citizenship, which is where we started, I think of citizenship as an active participant in society. So brand citizenship is the human face of a business actively participating in society. We like to think of business as solely an economic model, but let's be honest, business is a huge institution in which people interact with, which people have relationships with. So it is a social model as much as it is an economic model.
Absolutely.
And that notion that business is solely about money and economics and not about relationship, in my mind, has always been a false notion that was created in a classroom and in an academic theory.
You said before that you felt like you were kind of taking us off track, but the past couple of episodes that I've recorded have all gone in kind of similar directions.
Oh, I'll have to listen.
Which I absolutely love. And so I'm just sitting here processing some of the pieces that are coming together. It's a very exciting moment, and we've just had a great run with fascinating guests.
It must be who you're attracting.
Thank you, and thank you for being a part of it. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other work that you're doing currently, where you're helping leaders align their inner clarity with outer expression and making sure that, the brand, the strategy, and culture are united. And you've talked about this a little bit, but that often requires leaders to do the hardest work first, which is getting clear on who they actually are and what they truly stand for, behind all the, conditioning and market pressure. And so I would love to hear more about how you do that, because that's come up with the past few guests as well. Because outside of when you're a child and people ask you, what do you want to grow up to be? We don't really ask these questions of each other about who we are and who we stand for. We tend to just kind of go with the flow and don't ask those questions until we're in a crisis point.
And I think under the surface, something you're saying is really interesting to decouple who you be versus what you do. Yes. And so in our modern world, who we be, and forgive my bad grammar, that's intentional.
Yes.
Who we be is often defined by what we do. So we lose that sense. Yes. And so the idea is, how do you decouple that?
Yes.
And I can often be the cobbler's children without shoes, because I'm much better at helping others do that than I necessarily always am for myself.
I can relate to that as well.
But what I'd like to say is, when purpose and our grand why became part of sentiment and culture, you put a lot of pressure on not only businesses, but on individual people. And especially on certain generations that are looking to figure out, how do I live the life I desire and contribute? And what is the life I even desire? I don't know anymore. I mean, even baby boomers had Diane Keaton going off on baby boom and walking away. So this has been something people have wrestled with for decades, if not longer than that, centuries. What's important to you as an individual versus what you've told is important to you. And so when I work with people, I like to begin with a simple belief, and it's slightly controversial. There isn't a single grand why in your life. Purpose unfolds.
I love that. Purpose unfolds.
And to me, we each have, at least if we want to look at a metaphysical or spiritual perspective, we each have the same purpose of to uncover our best self. We each come on this earth with an individual set of gifts. And so the idea is how you learn to express those gifts in your day-to-day, and that unfolds over time. When I left Interbrand, I wasn't 100% certain what I was going to do, because I needed this flexibility. And to be honest, for several weeks, I think I just slept. But I had clients and even people who I didn't even know, like designers who I didn't even really know knew who I was, because I was the person from New York who came into London, and the senior person who came into London who helped to lay off people. So, you're not thought necessarily as the best person. So I think people I didn't even know really knew who I was called me and said, "Oh, if you're going off on your own, I'd like to come with you. Will you take me?" It was designers I mean, strategists and research people and people in Brand Val I knew, but those people I didn't know that well. But I really wasn't sure I was going to do that. Everyone assumed that, and clients assumed it. And when you leave in the UK, you have this gardening leave and this whole big thing that you can't work for a period of time. Very different than American contracts. And so I said, well, if these people are calling me, I guess this is what I'm meant to be doing. So I started my own consultancy, actually, and chose the name with the help from a former client from Reuters, Thomson Reuters today, and continued on. And after 2 years, an executive coach said to me, you say you left Interbrand, but you haven't, because we were still doing the same things. Everyone I was working with is the same. We were doing it with less politics, with less focus on turning a percentage back to a holding company and things like that. But we were doing the same work with the same people. And she said, is that what you really wanted to be doing? And to be honest, I had no idea. And so that same process of that unfolding is how I tend to like to work with people, and to understand that your purpose reveals itself in layers.
Yeah.
And I like to create a space where both, people talk about safe spaces. And right before the pandemic, I had what I sort of think of as a secondment in a way in an INGO. So I worked in an INGO for a year and change with global philanthropists. And this INGO is known for its mindfulness in the philanthropy world, as well as having really amazing on-ground, hugely impactful programs. But one of the things they always talked about, and if you spend any time in that sort of space, people, even in corporate now, people talk about safe spaces. I actually don't think safe spaces are great. I think safe spaces allow us to remain in the place we are. What you need is brave and courageous spaces. Yes, it needs to feel psychologically safe, but pure psychological safety doesn't necessarily push us to the edges of our boundaries. And I see your face changing, so you're wrestling with what I'm talking about.
So I think I'm aligned with what you're talking about. I had a visceral response because I'll just share this anecdote. I worked for a firm once, and I had just started working there. I'd been there a few weeks, and we were about to move into a new office. And the new office, when we went on the tour of it, the walls were all glass, and some of them had like some little frosting for privacy, but they were all glass. And one of my managers said, if everything is glass, where will people go when they cry? And I laughed because I thought it was a joke.
No, that's real.
It was not a joke.
That's very real.
It was not a joke. So when I think of a safe space, I'm thinking, like when you clarified, psychological safety, because in that environment, it was actually the case.
Absolutely.
Where people were not psychologically safe and they needed places to go to have breakdowns that were caused by a traumatic.
And I think that's the edge of the word vulnerability you're playing with there.
Yes, but
and so the idea is how
not
you
the same
create,
being comfortable and unchallenged, which is what you're saying.
which is often what safe spaces end up becoming.
Yeah.
It's about continuing to think the way you do rather than challenging you. So the idea is how, when I work with people, it's about reflection and then challenging them to be brave. And this is the same thing I do with corporations and C-suites. It's reflect on what things are about and push you to your edges. As long as you identify them, it doesn't mean you have to go through them. But it's intentionally knowing these things more so, and understanding the trade-offs. Over the years, so many people have reported to me, call me up, I'm trying to decide between this job or that job or the other thing. And I'm like, well, write down your priorities. And which is the most important? Is it the geography? Is it the salary? And again, to sound a little woo-woo, cucamonga spiritual, once you set that top priority and you really commit to it, you often get it, but you have to understand what it is. You may not get at the same time. Yes, we can have it all, but sometimes our definition of what all is a little off. And so it's about reflection and bravery coexisting. And for that to happen, it has to be about, I go back to trust and truth. You have to be someone who people trust. A woman who reported to me actually at Interbrand, New York, always clashed a little with me. And she preferred one of the relationship managers over me because she always told her how brilliant she was. And I'm a really tough reviewer. I rarely give fives because I don't even think I deserve fives. I don't, anyone who's perfect really has nowhere to grow. And part of the review process, in my mind, is to help you grow and see what your strengths are and what your areas for improvement are. Yes, everybody has one or two fives, but no one has a whole list of fives.
Right.
It's just not real.
Yeah.
And so this woman always respected me-ish when we worked together and when she was on my team. I had left Interbrand at this point and was living in London, and she called me one day and she was deciding about a job thing. And I was like, wow, I'm really surprised you're calling me and didn't go to so-and-so for her opinion. And I said, you know, honestly, I know what you thought of me. And there's so many people who have just, you know, they come from all the right background and are super smart, but have never been told anything about where they can improve. And I'm not trying to undercut them. My intent is not to undercut them, but to actually help them grow and move into that edge, move into that space that requires some bravery rather than all comfort, because they'll feel more fulfilled at the end of the day doing that. And I said, why are you calling me? And she said, because I know you're going to tell me the truth and not what I want to hear. And so I think when I work with people, it is about that relationship and about people just trusting you. In reality, whether it's brand consulting or coaching, so much of the process people use is the same. And what is the difference is that relationship and that push and pull between people.
Yeah.
And how that works together. And so I think of this unfolding and uncovering from a practical level about essentially getting curious about three different things. What energizes you? Everything we're good at is not always what gives us energy. Sometimes it drains us. Sometimes we're good at that because that was our survival mechanism as a child, or we've been conditioned that we had to be good at that. So first, get curious about what energizes you. What things actually get you excited and what things are like, oh, God, this is on my to-do list again. And it's not about being good or bad at it. It's about what energizes you. Then think about the value you add, not just in terms of numbers or all the things they tell you to put on your CV, your resume, but in terms of relationships with people. How do people feel when they're around you? What value do you bring to the world? What are these gifts you come? And then consider the outcomes you're seeking. What do you want your life to look like? And step back and say, is that really what I want my life to look like? And that triad helps people begin to understand their personal purpose, which you then have to explore and unfold. And to be honest, someone once told me this. They said you could live your purpose as a dental assistant or as a CEO. It doesn't matter what you're doing, except that does tie into the outcomes you're seeking. So there's where it starts unfolding and circling back. But you could be who you are in whatever you do, if I go back to who you be and what you do. So as
a powerful conversation in leadership.
Yeah. And so, you know, as I started off talking about my own little journey in Mr. Goodwin and never knowing that that was where I was going to end up being, you know, a lot of people want you to go back to what you wanted to be as a child. You're not that person anymore. And if you want to just get it biologically, there isn't a single cell in your body today that you share from when you were a child. Our cells regenerate, and I think it's every 7 years we're kind of a new person, which gives me really great hope because you can really rewrite your narrative and remove memories that way when you think about it. So it's not simply just going back. It's about that unfolding. And I use a questionnaire, which I'd like to say is short, but not necessarily that short, as a starting point. And you don't have to fill it out, but if you don't, you're not being brave to start with. And it surfaces those three things in success and fulfillment in the same way I like to do, whether it's qualitative research or quantitative research, from different angles. Because when you just ask, people used to say, like, ask a company, what are your values? And they can recite them. But actually, when you go out and talk to employees and talk to everything, you discover what a company really values is different than what they say. So when we assume that people know the answers by asking a question directly, we're not allowing them to explore. We're not creating that space for reflection and bravery. We're creating safety. And so that's why I sort of say something controversial of it's not about a safe space. It's about
And
this
that I
bravery.
actually, in this context, wholeheartedly agree with. It, as you were sharing the process that you're kind of walking people through, two things really stuck out to me. The first is that some of the best hires that I've made in the decade plus that I've been a full-time entrepreneur, I hired them because I knew they would challenge me, because they said something like during the interview or did something during the interview. Because I'm always telling my team, like, if I just wanted someone to agree with me, I can go talk to myself in the mirror. Like, I've bring English here for a reason, and it's to bring a thought process to the table that I don't have in my head, and to have the, like you said, we have to start with the foundation of trust, so that they know that, I'm not going to retaliate if they say, I don't like this idea, or Rachel, why are you doing this? So people have to know that you care, and you have to have that mutual trust. But that is really a lot of the innovations and things that I've been able to build in my businesses have come explicitly because there are people who will challenge me and pull me out of my comfort zone. So I do think that that is a powerful lesson. And I was starting to think, as you walk through the process that you're taking clients through, about how some of the work that we do with clients to help them envision where they're trying to go when we first onboard them is kind of grounded in a similar place. And so it was really interesting to hear the questions and to hear about the questionnaire that you're using. We've used the Michael Hyatt framework, where you make a list of the tasks that you repeatedly do, and the ones that you're, list the ones that you're passionate about, the ones that you're proficient in, because those things, like you said, are not the same.
So get that the same thing, exactly.
Asking people to step back and say, what does, I ask my team, like, what does thriving look like for you? Like, if you take away all of these things, like, I know you have all of these things that you are good at and that skills you have acquired out of necessity. But when we think about your career and we think about your personal life, where is it that you actually want to go? Where do you want to land? What does the ideal life look like for you? Because I can't help you build towards that if neither of us knows where it is.
So what's really interesting in that, and something that I learned early on as I was playing in this space personally versus from a brand perspective for businesses, I've often been invited in to present to, it often is women's employee groups. And I remember one of the first times I did this for a fairly prestigious law firm. And it's when the notion of personal purpose was really at its height, maybe 2017, 2018, 2019. I don't know, somewhere in that stage period, maybe even early. I know, somewhere in that period. Yeah. As I went through this exercise, and because it was a law firm, it was tying it to social media because they actually weren't really supposed to be on there. So how do you deal with your profile relative? It was just determining purpose through these circles in a clearly, because it's a workshop for just a few hours, it's a more simplistic manner. But one of the things I said to them when talking about the outcomes and the things that matter is, I said, it's okay if what your real purpose is has nothing to do with work, and work is solely about earning a paycheck. And I think part of the pressure that happened with the whole purpose notion, and why so many people are dissatisfied with work, is work was supposed to fulfill everything. And for some people it does. I can tell you, for me, work is a huge part of my fulfillment. I love my family, and my family life fulfills me enormously, and my personal other interests too. But if you took work out away from me, I would wither. It is in my DNA, and that's not supposed to be a good thing either. That's like politically incorrect today, and a whole new age philosophy or whatever. But one of the things I found is, when I said to them, if this uncovers that your purpose has nothing to do with your job, that's okay.
That is okay.
As long as you understand that this is fueling financially your ability to do the things that matter most to you.
Right.
And I think that's something that's really hard for some leaders to wrestle with.
Because I think if you haven't done the work of decoupling your identity from your job, then you take that personally when the job does not mean the same to a team member that it means to you. And so I think that's, there's so many reasons why it's important to do that decoupling. But I think that's one of the ways it shows up in leadership quite often.
And it's just, it's okay. Work doesn't have to be your form of fulfillment. Your purpose could be solely to nurture people. And you can do that in how you interact with your team members, but maybe that's as greatest satisfaction from that comes from your children, or comes from other family members or your neighbors or a community organization you volunteer with. There's a whole range of ways we can feel that sense of fulfillment. It doesn't, people are paradoxical and we like to try to make them linear, and they're not. And that's the beauty of humanity. It's not about being told everything is good and great.
Yeah.
It's about evolving and accepting that we grow. And to me, if you stop growing, that's when you stop feeling fulfilled.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so there are so many gems from this conversation about not just the corporate social responsibility, but really about purpose and leadership. And I just have one last question for you. You've been in this work long enough that you've seen, multiple waves of purpose trends come and go. So, I think the time frame you were alluding to was kind of when Rick Warren and the Purpose-Driven Life was huge, and like everybody had the book and the journal, and then to CSR, to shared value, to conscious capitalism, to stakeholder capitalism. But looking ahead beyond the buzzwords, what do you think this next version of our economy that really serves all of us better, what do you think that actually looks like?
Well, I'll go back to this notion of understanding business as a social institution and not only an economic one. I feel that we will bring more humanness back into business and the notion of business. And we're going to shift the consciousness of business. And to me, that's really important. At the moment, we're optimizing for performance. We're focused on metrics and analytics, and we become transactional. Underpinning everything we've spoken about is this notion of business being relational. Yes, it's about transactions, but ultimately it's about relationals and the nature of each of the things that are interconnected within the network, as well as the red thread, which is the purpose that runs through a single business. So as we're losing the relational characteristic, we're trying to make business such an economic thing. When there's a pushback from people of, I want humanity, I want goodness. And that's because people are craving connection and meaning and belonging. I don't want to go into the thousands of studies about isolation, even as we're all connected larger. We've created, and this happened in the industrial era, and it's one of my pet peeves of life and work. Work is part of life.
Yeah.
Work gives us a sense of accomplishment. And even if it's not your largest notion of fulfillment, it is a sense of accomplishment. And so when we see it as our professional life and our personal life, as these things flowing together, as humanity being embedded in all of this, and I know this sounds ethereal, so forgive me, we will start to shift the consciousness of business and have promises held and practiced to cultivate more trust. And when trust is lived, enterprises, businesses, start fulfilling their social role as places of gathering again. Work should be human and dignified, and I think we are pushing against it. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but you see more and more people continuing to hold on to this notion, even as backlash grows or comes in waves, it's up and down. Work should be a place where our gifts are welcome and our contribution grows. It's not an enemy of life. It's, as I said, it's part of life. It sits at the core of life. And, when we do all this, we'll start seeing how relationships matter again. Because right now, this transactional nature of business, all the Zooms, all of this, it's all about getting that task done, not about connecting with people. And I have this one client in a large corporation who said, we all just have to get together like we used to in the old world. We've worked with these people for 2 years and haven't ever met them. We want to pitch, huge amount of work, never meeting these people. And that's what's making it extractive and not human. Yeah. And once we make it more human, we'll be less extractive to the environment. And yes, there is a huge urgency right now around all that. So I know I'm sounding Pollyanna-ish, but I want people to take away that relationships matter. That to me, was a lesson I learned when I was interning in my summer of business school. I was interning at Cadbury Schweppes, and I was working on York peppermint patties, which is now owned by Hershey. And I actually accomplished a ton in my summer internship. And one day I was in with the engineers talking about this change maker, which is the package that sits on a counter and you buy the they're no longer 5 cents, but whatever they cost, the little candies from. And it was Monday morning. I had worked the whole weekend. And I come in Monday morning at like 8:30 or 8 o'clock, whatever time it was, meet with the engineers, and I go on and we have our meeting. And at the end, the senior guy said, Anne, can you just hang out for a minute or whatever he said? And he said, I know you're a really nice person. You need to remember it was Monday morning and ask people how their weekend was. So they too know you're a nice person. He goes, it's amazing what you get done. And it's amazing the integrity that you have behind everything you do. It all comes from a sincere place. But you need to let people know that. And so that was all about relationship, not about transaction. And so I had that lesson early on, and that changed every single interaction, that one conversation. Every interaction I had after that was changed. And so I think we're in the same moment as a culture right now.
I would agree. I had a similar experience at my first internship where a mentor told me that the most valuable people you will meet are the connectors. And he said, if you can be a connector, meaning that you actually listen to people and know what they need, and when you meet someone else who a good connection to them, that you facilitate those introductions, that is the most powerful thing that you can do to add value to the people around you. And that has, my mentor Edgar Melton said that when I was 18, and I'm
Wow. I don't remember the name of the man who told me, which makes me sad. I'd like to remember his name. I remember what he looks like, but his name, I have no idea.
I don't think I'm surprised I knew that name because I also have. Maybe I'll see if I can go find him on LinkedIn and say, I just had a full circle moment about something I'm sure you don't remember telling me decades ago.
I think he'd love that if he's still around on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that is what I will do after we wrap up. So, Anne, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. And so for all of our listeners, what I would love for you to do is to grab a copy of Anne's book, Do Good, and then before you do anything else today, to pull out a piece of paper and honestly assess where your business sits on the Me-to-We Continuum. And ask, are you operating from self-interest or stakeholder citizenship without judgment? But just write it down so that you can see it clearly, because that awareness is the first step toward transformation. And taking it another level, ask yourself those questions that Anne mentioned to help you figure out where your values lie and what is most important to you. And for those of you who are interested in continuing this work, Anne is also available for consulting, speaking, and workshops. So Anne, where can people find you if they'd like to continue this conversation?
Well, I have a website, annebahrthompson.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on X, but I don't ever go on there anymore. I'm on Blue Sky, but I haven't actually activated that. I keep telling myself I have to do it because I used to have a really active Twitter life, but I haven't had an active X life at all. But I respond to everything. So if you send me a LinkedIn message or send me an email off my website, I honestly, even things I know are pure marketing, I respond to. And I'm sure you all everyone gets these things, having written a book, people don't often see my book was published by a publishing house or things like that. I get all these things about, oh, well, take your book, we'll do this, we'll do that. And I actually say to people, instead of just going and sending everybody a generic email on the list, you should look up people. I literally write this. I was like, I'm not your target audience. And you've actually turned me off to anything I might have contacted with you about because you completely did not understand who I am. And I'm on all these weird lists that have nothing to do with what I do. Operations stuff. It's over. Yeah. And so I actually tell people it might benefit you.
Yeah.
To actually look up, if nothing else, take the list and shove it into AI and ask ChatGPT or whatever, Gemini or whichever AI, I don't know, there's so many different, Grace or whatever you use. Ask them, tell me if these people are appropriate to what I'm offering. Let's be honest, that's a great thing AI is good for, targeting your mailing list appropriately that you bought generically. And especially as a founder and as a small business, making sure you're reaching out to people for the right reasons really makes a difference.
It really does.
I mean, maybe I'm just crazy and everyone else just ignores them, but I actually do respond to my husband's always like, why are you wasting your time? Like, because I want someone to tell me.
Yeah. And and hopefully someone actually is listening and walks away with the desire to do things a bit differently.
Maybe. Or they just say, God, what an awful person.
Either way, you put a little good back into the world.
Yes, that's I try. There we go.
Yeah. So,
But honestly, if you reach out with any questions, I will answer them. I do my
Awesome.
best. It may not happen within 24 or 48 hours, but it will happen.
Thank you. So that is Anne Bahr Thompson, everyone. Like she said, you can find her on LinkedIn, on her website, and maybe one day both of us will activate our Blue Sky accounts. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the Purpose Profit Shift wherever you get your podcast, and join us next time as we continue exploring what's possible when business becomes a force for justice, sustainability, and profit. Remember that the future of business isn't just about what you build, it's about who you become in the process and who you bring along with you. Until next time, keep shifting.